Hey everybody, it's MJ from Just Plain Fun, and this is a video about molding, more specifically about reproducing molding, and we're going to use the Stanley No45. And this is how this project came to be. I had a local friend of mine, Richard. He called me up. He said, "Hey MJ, I got this molding that I need to reproduce for a home up in Williamsburg for a friend of mine. He's doing some restoration work on it, and nothing too complicated, but we just need to lay down a 1/2 inch bead on one edge of some cedar." And I was like, yeah, absolutely, we can make that happen. The following Saturday afternoon, Richard showed up at my house and he brought in 3 10-foot sections of white cedar. And he brought in a sample from the actual old molding. It looked something like this. But the first observation that I made on this is going to be far different than doing hobby woodworking in the shop. Because if you make say a 4-foot bookshelf and you put some kind of design or edge on it using a 45, that is way different than doing a 10-foot section, and especially white cedar that's got some knots. You'll see what I'm talking about. But basically doing production work with a number 45, a very different experience than doing hobby woodworking. This is the sample piece we were working with, and we're trying to replicate that. So before Richard arrived, I was working with some red cedar and just trying to get a feel for it, lay down a 1/2 inch bead on this. And as you can see, it is not correct because it's not supposed to have that little lip at the bottom of it. So we know we need to adjust the fence a little bit in order to match the original. Before we could get to the actual work, of course, we had to make sure that the blade was sharp. So we're going to start by flattening the back of it. And if you're not familiar with this particular technique, we're just drawing cross hatches on the back of the iron with a Sharpie, and then we're going to put it on the diamond plate that you can see there. And we're going to work it until the cross hatches disappear. For you old hats that have done it a few times, you're familiar. If you've never seen this, it's a pretty good technique to use. We've got our cross hatches drawn in the back. We're going to make sure that the entire iron, at least the top of it that's in contact with the diamond plates, is flat against the diamond plates. And we're just going to work it back and forth. I'm sure if you've ever sharpened an iron before, you know how this goes. We're flattening the back. We're making those cross hatches disappear. And then we will work our way forward from there. There's no need to belabor the point. You're going to work through your progression of stones, working your way up through the grits. There are a couple different options for sharpening the center of your beating iron, but this is my preferred method. I use a round file like this and just go slowly, and we're just trying to produce that burr on the back of the iron again so that we know that it's getting sharp. With a little bit of trial and error, you'll figure out what's going to work best for you as far as how to hold the iron, how to hold the file in angles and things like that, but these are the techniques that we employed. Once we had our burr back on the back of the iron again, then it's back to the diamond stones. We're making sure that the iron is nice and flat against the stone, and we're just going to slowly and carefully work that burr off of it. Once again, making sure that the back of the iron is flat, and it looks like we've got a winner there. If you don't have the round file, this is another option. Sandpaper wrapped around a 1/2 inch dowel for a 1/2 inch beating iron, and you can get pretty similar results with that. One step you do not want to skip is practice cuts. So this is a piece of scrap wood. We set the fence and we still got that lip that we don't want, but then our second pass, you can see we got rid of the lip. This is right where we want to be. Our blade is nice and sharp. Our fence is set where we need it to be. Now we're ready to cut the actual board. So I'm starting at the far end in order to establish a track, a path for the blade to take. I've done some separate videos on setting up and using the number 45. You can go back and find those in my catalog. But we're starting at the far end of the stock, and then we're just backing up and then slowly moving forward and back in order to establish that track. And with a beating iron, it's pretty straightforward. Of course, you're going to keep good pressure on the fence against the stock, and away you go. Did y'all hear that? That's what it's supposed to sound like. And if you do this enough, you can actually train your ear to be able to tell when you're taking the right depth of cut. And to make sure that you're holding the 45, you're not pushing down on it. Because if you go awry, you're going to hear the difference. This board that's on the bench right now is the first of the 3 10-footers. And we intentionally picked one that had no knots all along that edge and was going to be easier to deal with and, fewer obstacles. And it also had a fairly true edge on it as well. So this is our chance to get our process down and make sure that we know what the heck we're doing. Because how often are you cutting a bead on a 10-foot board? This is board number 2 up on the bench. And we had a little bit more in terms of obstacles to deal with on this one. But I do have to point out that we did sharpen, well, rather we honed the iron in between in order to make sure that we were starting with a nice, fresh, sharp iron for board number 2. Now we know that wood is not a perfect medium, and so the edge on this particular board was not straight at all. But our thought process was, well, as long as we keep the fence against the edge of the board, then the 45 is going to stay on track, and the bead will run parallel to the edge, even if it's not perfectly true. And the advantage of having a board this long is that it's going to flex some. And so when the gentleman went to actually install it on the house, he'll be able to flex it a little bit. And for all I know, he may actually be cutting this into smaller sections as well. We just know that we have the 10-foot pieces to work with. One other thing that bears mentioning, you can see I've got the roller set up, and we do have a shim underneath that in order to make sure that the fence cleared the roller. But my bench is not 10 feet long, so we needed that. Board number 3 had that nice big fat knot right there in the center, but what we did is we cut the bead the best we could just over that knot, and then we went back and worked forward and after the knot in separate sections. And prior to doing the real thing, we did get some practice in on some of our scrap wood working over a knot. And here's the final product. It took actually less time than what I was anticipating, but we've got a nice 1/2-inch bead along the edge of each one of these boards. And a quick check of our work against the answer key, and I'd say we've got a winner there. Hey, y'all let me know in the comments if you would have done anything different. Now, who the heck is going to clean up this mess?